No, I didn't mean it. I love it right now because I said earlier on, you're the last person I'm talking to, so you probably get the best interview, darling, don't worry.
The news that Queen frontman Freddie Mercury was dying but had kept it a secret for years surprised fans in 1991. Even though his body was frail, his voice was strong. It was for the sake of his health that he shot his final video in monochrome. Except for painkillers, he stopped taking any medication in his last days. Just one day after informing the world about his condition, he passed away. Here we are here to tell you the truth about Freddie Mercury's last days. The man known as Freddie Mercury came into this world in Stone Town, Zanzibar, on September 5, 1946, as Farrokh Bulsara. His Parsi parents, Bomi and Jer Bulsara, were originally from the Gujarati town of Bulsar, now known as Valsad. The ancient Persian faith of Zoroastrianism was practiced by his family. Even as a baby, Freddie was different. He had 4 additional teeth, and always thought that was the source of his strong singing voice. He was capable of singing everything from low bass to high soprano. Because Zanzibar was still a British colony when he was born, he was also technically a British subject. This seemingly little fact would lead him incredible opportunities and transform his life. Kashmira, Freddie's sister, was born when he was 6 years old. Years later, in 1969, when his popularity was beginning to grow, he formally became a citizen of the United Kingdom and colonies. He had a carefree and wealthy childhood in Zanzibar. Because of his father's position as High Court cashier for the British colonial government, the family had certain privileges. Unlike the others, they had a comfortable lifestyle. A taste of British schooling was offered to Freddie at an institution managed by missionaries, where he was taught by Anglican nuns. In 1964, though, everything changed. Zanzibar was the scene of a bloody revolution. Numerous South Asians and Arabs lost their lives. They had no choice but to run. The Bulsaras abandoned their possessions and made their way to England. In the year 1766, Freddie was born. The transition from tropical bliss to dreary old Britain was abrupt and unwelcome. Everything changed after that. However, the actual commencement had begun some years prior. St. Peter's School in Panchgani, India, was Freddie's destination when he was 8 years old, according to his parents. It was a residential school in the British tradition, hidden in the hills outside of Mumbai. Students were required to wear uniforms, adhere to school regulations, and use correct English. Surprisingly, Freddie's headmaster recognized his potential and requested that his parents shell out more money for private piano lessons. Nothing major happened because of that one choice. Freddie picked it up fast. He was talented, not only decent. Besides being a natural on the field, he was also a talented actor, painter, and pianist. He remained discreet without ever being unnoticed. He was unfazed by the fact that other children dubbed him Bucky because to his jawline. He was named best all-arounder at his school when he was 12 years old. In a word, it was Freddie, talented in every way but especially on stage. With a renewed feeling of purpose and a plethora of fresh ideas, he returned to Zanzibar in 1963. However, he had already experienced the exhilaration of the stage prior to that. Even though he was just 12 years old, Freddie joined a band at St. Peter's called the Hectics. Bruce, Derek, Fang, and Victory were the other 4 lads in the gang. Little Richard, Cliff Richard, and Elvis Presley were among the artists whose music they performed. For fun, Freddie would sing and play the piano. His deft touch on the piano keys and ability to reproduce songs from memory astounded onlookers. The band became viral at school functions, with students going wild with applause, screams, and dances. Freddie had his first taste of fame from his early fame. However, he also drew inspiration from the music of Bollywood legends like Kishore Kumar and Lata Mangeshkar, in addition to rock. Their heartfelt performances would eventually inspire Queen's operatic dramatic music. He had already achieved grade 4 proficiency in piano by the time he departed from St. Peter's. At the tender age of 17, Freddie's Zanzibar world came crashing down in 1964. He was one of hundreds of Parsi Indians who became the targets of a wave of bigotry that swept over the island. They left behind sunlight, friends, and everything familiar as they fled to England, packing what they could. His family had no alternative but to go. They didn't touch down in a posh or luxurious location. Rather, they started their new lives in a boring neighborhood named Feltham, several miles outside of downtown London. For a youngster who had once swum in turquoise seas, everything felt chilly. The homes were gray, the skies were much grayer. Even though being here felt like being cast out, something began to sprout in the stillness. Freddie changed after surviving the trauma. He enrolled at Isleworth Polytechnic and subsequently transferred to Ealing Art College after completing high school. There was an instant enchantment. For artists, outcasts, and rebels, Ealing was more than simply a school. Among those who refused to conform, Freddie discovered his people. Even though he majored in graphic design, he fantasized of being a musician almost as much. The two hit it off immediately. He was into music, and Tim Staffel was into thinking outside the confines of his academic program. Despite being expected to enter the design business, Freddie helped develop an underground magazine that made fun of it. He want more. Jimi Hendrix was Freddie's idol outside of school. When he heard him play, something clicked. Instead of passively taking it all in, he documented Hendrix's concerts, analyzed his techniques, and drew sketches. Not content to merely sing, he yearned for the authority to command the stage. He joined a band named Ibex as a result of his devotion. They performed at dive bars and shared apartments. They didn't achieve fame. That he could give it a go, fall flat, and try again made Freddie pleased. He was evolving into something new. From the gospel of Aretha Franklin to the songwriting of John Lennon, he absorbed it all up. In addition to Elvis's untamed energy, he adored the Beatles' harmonies. In his head, soul, rock, and glam were all mashed together. He and Roger Taylor were selling clothing at Kensington Market. They had fun, worked together, and spent a lot of time hanging around. Not only did he get paid, but he also got style from that employment. He figured out how to stand out, not as Farouk, but as Freddie, by learning what was attractive and what others noticed. Things began to shift when Freddie Bulsara was just 22 years old. He was uncertain about his future after graduating from art school in London. Later on, in August 1969, he crossed paths with a Liverpool band named Ibex. They hadn't done many shows and weren't famous. However, both Freddie and they recognized something in each other. He joined them on their journey to Bolton after learning all of their songs in a mere 10 days, to which he contributed a few of his own. The Octagon Theatre was the site of his debut performance. Even if they didn't realize it yet, the audience was witnessing the birth of a celebrity. Not only could Freddie sing, but he also captivated, wowed, and ruled the stage. It was completely new to the band. According to one member, "We used to just play and not worry about putting on a show." However, everything changed when Freddie came up. With just a single shirt and pair of pants, he strided confidently like a rock star. Freddie was successful in getting the band to rebrand from Ibex to Wreckage by October. Similarly, the tone shifted. The prolific songwriting of Freddie continued. Vagabond, Outcast, and FWA were among the tunes he and guitarist Mike Buren collaborated on. They even recorded one of those songs, Green, at Freddie's London apartment. Even after all these years, that recording would finally see the light of day. Unfortunately, Wreckage was short-lived. Freddie's band Sour Milk Sea disbanded shortly after. However, Freddie remained unfazed and continued to see greater things. He allegedly warned his former bandmates, "We're not going to make it playing all this three-chord blues trash. We need to come up with our own music." Then, the unexpected turn of events occurred. Smile, a band consisting of Tim Staffel, Roger Taylor, and Brian May, disbanded on March 29, 1970. Tim and Freddie had been pals since their 1965 meeting at art college. Thus, Freddie wasted little time stepping in once Tim departed. It seemed predetermined. Freddie added something new, something captivating, to Smile's already impressive ability. He was confident, had vision, and a voice. He would attend their performances even before he joined to offer constructive criticism. Roger then clarified that he was simply Brian's crazy mate, not a singer, but someone who was up for fun. This cleared up Brian's initial confusion. That, however, changed very fast. After Freddie climbed in, there was no turning back. He had been waiting for this. In terms of stage demeanor, clothing, and everything else, he insisted that the band be more theatrical. He had grandiose dreams for them. His next suggestion was a different name: Queen. In addition to being somewhat offensive, it sounded majestic and royal. Although Brian and Roger were hesitant, Freddie was adamant. It was flawless, applicable to everyone, and powerful. At about the same time, he decided to go by the moniker Mercury himself. It was more than simply a new band. It was a radical departure from the norm. They were missing one key member, though: a bassist. So they weren't quite ready to perform. They gave it a few tries, but nothing worked. John Deacon was their next encounter, which occurred in 1971. He arrived at practice with his bass and a custom-built amp, despite being quiet, a student, and just 19 years old. He wasn't flamboyant like the rest. Later on, same amp would play a role in creating Queen's distinctive sound. He kept his cool, played without fuss, and didn't try to steal the show. Because of it, the band decided to bring him on board. At last, the Queen felt whole. Even further, Freddie was involved in the creation of the logo. Taking into consideration their respective zodiac signs, he utilized his knowledge of painting to create a crest depicting lions for Roger and John, a crab for Brian, and fairies for himself. He encircled it with a massive Q, a phoenix above, and a crown in the center. It seemed like it belonged to a regal band that was designed to dominate the stage. Making their debut record was no picnic. Notable artists like the Beatles have previously recorded at Trident Studios. Because Queen wasn't yet famous, they could only use the studio at odd hours, like late at night, when no one else was there. After waiting around, they would record till the morning. They persisted for months, even though it was draining. Even worse news came after the record was finished. It was delayed. They passed the time patiently. July 1973 was the official release date. Opinions were divided. While some understood, the majority did not. The band, however, was unconcerned since they were creating something timeless. Even in 1974, Queen hadn't yet figured out who they were. Sure, their early albums included skill, but they sounded disjointed, too lengthy, too complicated, and always attempting to reinvent themselves. However, it all changed when Sheer Heart Attack came out. Freddie finally stopped messing around with his sound and began to own it at this point. Even though they were just 3 minutes long, he made the songs feel much longer by bringing drama, glitz, and tightening them up. By the time Killer Queen came out, they had gone from being just another band to the band. Queen eventually broke through when the song became a smash in the United Kingdom and then the United States. Nothing glitzy was going on behind the scenes. While the rest of the band worked as part-timers, Queen's label Trident pocketed the majority of the earnings. They were struck, yet they couldn't afford a decent place to live. It was so bad that John Deacon couldn't even secure a mortgage, and Freddie had to make do with a wet, small apartment. They lost it at that point. They finally won their freedom after months of court fights, but it came at a high cost. They had to fork up hundreds of thousands of dollars and forego royalties from any future records they made. They planned to create their most costly album ever, A Night at the Opera, just after they were free, which was a dangerous move. This record wasn't your average spin, it was a desperate attempt. They bet it all, utilized 7 studios, and spent more money than any other British band before them. They were finished if it didn't function. They were driven to strive for greater heights by the crushing strain. Unpredictable at first. No chorus, operatic lunacy. Who would play such a 6-minute behemoth as Bohemian Rhapsody on the radio? Freddie, ever the daring, walked in with it. Strangely, Freddie wasn't inquiring. He was sharing information. In only one day, he redefined the laws of pop music with a low-budget yet spectacular video. It was 9 weeks that the song remained at the top. It was really novel and effective. It wasn't simply the song that altered music for Freddie. It was him. When he was on stage, he transformed into someone else entirely. A strutting, dominating performer. Crazy highs and devastating lows were within his vocal range. He had the incredible ability to make even the largest audience of 20,000 people feel as if he were singing just for them. He shattered the mic stand by mistake, right? He made it his hallmark maneuver, weapon, and prop. When he first performed Bohemian Rhapsody live, audiences were treated to more than simply a concert. They were treated to a display of a showman at his most dazzling. Afterwards, in 1977 at Bingley Hall, when the band had finished playing, the audience unexpectedly began singing, "You'll Never Walk Alone." It had been completely unplanned. In awe, Freddie observed. He looked across at Brian May and said, "We need songs for this." 2 of the most famous stadium anthems of all time, "We Will Rock You" and "We Are the Champions," were developed from that one intense crowd reaction. Night after night, the fans screamed back at Mercury because he was no longer only performing. He was making music that could do precisely that. By the time 1980's Another One Bites the Dust came out, Queen had strayed far from their glam rock origins under Freddie's direction. Unexpected, edgy, and funky. That was the tune. It became Queen's biggest success in the US, despite everyone's doubts that they could pull it off. A man who never sat still, Mercury was always on the go and always inventing something new. Because no one could track him down, his music continued to attract new listeners. Indulgence followed success. Mercury was of the belief that money was best spent, not saved. Everything he loved, he purchased. His sister, who was in need of a kitchen, received one. And if a jewelry store happened to be closed, he would arrange to have it opened specifically for him. His Pizza Palace birthday bash was an absolute hoot. 700 people. A gigantic cake inspired by God's church, and countless shattered glasses. Freddie lived louder than everybody else toward the end. He didn't simply live huge, he was not successful in all that he attempted. Despite the presence of the apartheid government in South Africa, Queen chose to perform at Sun City in 1984. Despite being within the law, it sparked a cultural boycott, and the majority of participating artists chose not to attend. Regardless, Queen went. Although others perceived it as politically motivated, they said it wasn't. The reaction was severe. They were punished, put on the blacklist, and mocked in protest songs for a long time. The band members themselves later acknowledged the possibility that they had erred. The harm had already been done, notwithstanding their claims that they weren't motivated by money. Something fresh was always beckoning to Freddie Mercury. As a result of that pursuit, in 1980, Queen found herself in uncharted musical territory. The score for the film Flash Gordon. Not many of the tracks had lyrics, and the CD wasn't quite rock. Most of the work was done by Brian May, who dove headfirst into the band's newfound interest in synthesizers. Many viewers were confused by it. Some found the score more engaging than the film, while others failed to grasp it. However, that peculiar undertaking foreshadowed a more substantial matter. Queen was on the verge of making a course correction, and not everyone would adhere. With Hot Space, released only 2 years after that, they veered even further from the path. All synthesizers contributed to this disco-funk sound. The Queen wasn't the one who was remembered. While Brian and Roger weren't into it, John Deacon and Freddie were. Both the stress and the harm were plain to see. After a few too many drinks, the long nights in Munich escalated into lengthy arguments. According to Brian, they were devastated emotionally. For Roger, the band's foray into gay club music had been encouraged by Paul Prenter, Freddie's manager. For them, it was more than simply a disappointing CD. It was an act of betrayal. Although some fans disregarded them, others paid attention. The musicians paid attention. Michael Jackson took notes. Even if Hot Space was a failure, it left an impression on every industry in the years that followed. Despite all this mayhem, a miraculous meeting took place in a Swiss studio. Queen and David Bowie. The original jam evolved into Under Pressure, complete with the infectious bassy Deacon bass line and an overwhelming sense of intensity. Despite their ongoing feud, the flame that ignited the song was what really set Freddie and Bowie apart. Even though they were coming apart behind the scenes, it still managed to surprise everyone and go straight to #1. By 1983, they were exhausted. Not only exhausted, they required a vacation. They had argued, toured, and recorded for years. This is the first time they've paused since they started. The Queen pushed the pause button. They were able to catch their breath during the pause, but it wasn't a panacea. Freddie and John Deacon preferred a more dance-oriented sound, but Brian and Roger were more committed to rock. Things became worse because Freddie was devoted to Prenter. The stillness, nevertheless, allowed them to reflect on their past and future selves. In 1984, The Works was released. They required this reset. Brian and Roger regained possession of their guitars, Deacon contributed rhythm, and Freddie supplied his flair. The music was a harmonious blend of rock and pop. Radio Gaga went boom. An anthem, I Want to Break Free, developed. They remained in the top 10 for over 2 years, proving that the band had returned. This time, everyone paid attention, aside from the United States. Performing I Want to Break Free in drag was featured in the music video. While MTV missed the humor, the UK did. There was a prohibition on the video. As Freddie took the stage in the outfit, the Rio audience booed and pelted him with objects. It was so traumatic that Queen never got over it in the United States. Freddie continued on his mission since he still had a point to make. His 1985 solo album, Mr. Bad Guy, was issued by him. Nothing just Freddie, no filler, just him. He included dancing tracks, melancholy ballads, and playful skits in it, and he dedicated it to his cats. Opinions on the matter varied among supporters. America hardly took note. However, independence was more important to Freddie than sales. He was finally free from the Queen machine after years of captivity. He was doing things his way. His next surprising move was to form an alliance with opera singer Montserrat Cabell, who had long been an inspiration of his. In a Barcelona hotel, they met, and he sang her falsetto passages while she listened to a tape. Shock swept across her. When they recorded Barcelona, it was like listening to a work of magic, an unprecedented fusion of opera and rock. After Barcelona was selected as the Olympic anthem for 1992, The duo went on to record a whole album together. It was gorgeous, unusual, and daring, much like Freddie. Freddie Mercury was aware that time was of the essence, yet he remained unfazed. He returned to recording in the studio with Queen in early 1988, only a few months after receiving his HIV diagnosis. He kept it quiet since he didn't want anyone to feel sorry for him. All he wanted to do was sing. Despite the terror and anguish, he managed to give it his best. A record that sounded more like a victory than a goodbye, The Miracle, was the end product. It became the most played song in Europe. Although no one had noticed it yet, it was truly miraculous. Innuendo followed. Although Freddie's physical strength had diminished by the time they began recording the album, his vocal abilities remained unaffected. Brian May revealed afterwards that Freddie had pleaded with them to continue songwriting despite his illness. "You can finish it after I'm gone," he said, but he gave it his all while he was still here. The lead single was the title tune. Like him, it was daring, eerie, and magnificent. It was becoming more difficult to conceal the facts in public, though. At the Brit Awards on February 18, 1990, Freddie and Queen accepted a Lifetime Achievement Award. "Thank you," were the only 5 words he spoke. "Good night." His quiet voice conveyed more than any words could have. He seemed frail and exhausted, and all of a sudden, the long simmering whispers were absolutely true. Even at that moment, he waved and smiled, because he didn't want his admirers to know how hurt he was. According to his former bandmates, there was an unwritten agreement that said they wouldn't bring up Freddie's condition if he didn't want them to. He resumed recording after he returned to the studio. He continued to show up, even though he was in so much pain that he could not stand or sing for more than an hour or 2 on some days. According to the engineers who were his co-workers, it was a joyful atmosphere full of laughter. Even though his body was giving out, Freddie managed to keep things light-hearted. Without hesitation, he agreed to sing lead on "The Show Must Go On" when requested. With a single drink of vodka, he said the words, "I'll do it, darling," and succeeded flawlessly. Among the high points of his career, the performance stands out. Unless you looked very closely, you wouldn't notice that he recorded his final music video, "These Are the Days of Our Lives," in May 1991. To downplay the severity of his illness, the film was shot in monochrome. An illustration of one of his feline friends adorned his vest. As he repeated the process until he was happy with the results, he grinned and made jokes. Looking directly into the camera, he muttered, "I still love you." That was his last message. He was aware of what was to come, and he made sure everyone knew he loved them until the very end. His ultimate choice came in November, a few months later. He would just take painkillers and no more drugs. He was prepared. He desired tranquility. His companions were there for him at all hours. Even though he lost the ability to paint and had blurry vision, he never stopped laughing and reminiscing. He instructed Queen's management to make a public statement revealing his AIDS diagnosis on November 22nd. The news broke about 8 o'clock in the evening, and Freddie Mercury, who was laying in bed at the time, grinned. He appeared more at ease than she had seen him in years, according to his aide. Once the secret was out, the battle was nearly finished. Less than 24 hours after that, at precisely 6:48 p.m. on November 24th, 1991, Freddie Mercury passed away. At the age of 45, he was old. During an era when the mere mention of the term AIDS was enough to make many uneasy, the world lost a legendary figure who had spoken out about his battle with the disease. Because of his passing, the topic was no longer able to be sidelined. But Freddie's legacy includes an enigma that no memorial service will ever be able to resolve. His cremation in West London's Kensal Green Cemetery was well known, but nobody knew what became of his remains. Their owner failed to claim them for more than a year. Mary Austin, his former girlfriend and best friend, took them in the end, although she was mum about where they went. Supporters unearthed a little plaque at the cemetery in 2013. It had his full name, dates of birth and death, and a French message signed with a M. However, it was deleted shortly afterward, perhaps to protect the secret.